Right. Okay.
Right, right. So to begin, I want to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, to this event. This is part of the United Nations General Assembly 70th session side event here in New York. We have a global audience watching, and I would love to apologize for the delay. We went live, and then we came back, and then we're back again. So I'm glad we have some of our guests here in the studio. Not a studio, but maybe it is a studio right here at the Bronx Community College. But before we begin, I would like to observe a moment of silence for the Nigerian international star Mohbad, who was murdered on September 12th. May his soul rest in peace. Morocco as well.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for the moment of silence. Before we go on, I want to thank the Bronx Community College for hosting this historic event, the first of its kind in the Bronx. A special appreciation to Mr. Gene Adams, Director of Collaborative Education, Co-Director, Science and Technology Entry Program, Faculty Advisor, BCC African Students Association, for facilitating this opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Gene. And a brief comment from you, please.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming here and continuing to put forward the critical issues that are happening in Africa and how those issues have impact on not only us here in the Western United States, but really these are global issues. And we're living in a time when, of course, the Ukrainian issue, which is an important issue, is front and center stage. But at the same time, we have a tendency to deny or at least neglect the issues that are globally happening, specifically coming out of the African continent. It's important that we have this conversation in the Bronx, because at this present time, the Bronx probably has the largest, most diverse African community in the United States. Our institution has probably the largest number of African students within this university system here in New York. And BCC also has the privilege of having one of the first African presidents, and that was Mr. Thomas II, who's retired last month after a 7-8 year stint here. So we're a community that is a part of and witnessing globally what's happening on the African continent. In the year 2000, there were maybe 20,000 Africans living in the Bronx. Today, there are about at least 150,000. That means they're bringing their concerns, their issues forward with them. So as a community, we have to be responsive and responsible and active in making sure that these families, these new community members are serviced and have equal and access and opportunity within New York City. So this event is critical because what's happening in West Africa, what happened in Niger, what's going on in Gabon was.
I would like to introduce briefly three of our panelists, original panelists. So we modified the structure of this event because that's what we do. You know, when life gives you lemon, you make lemonade, right? That's what happened today. So I'm going to introduce my citizen journalist, Mr. I'm having a break this for a second. Mamadou Niang to my right here, and also one of our panelists. I also have to my left, Professor Nelson Almadi. Maybe my age is kicking in, whether I like it or not. Nelson Almadi. And we also have Professor Naka to the far to my left. So, but I'm going to pass on the mic to Mamadou Niang, right, to introduce himself, and then we actually go around and everyone introduce themselves briefly, then we can start the conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This is an August assembly, and I really echo those beautiful words that you actually said about France, which is the African Council of the United States. I think it is known enough because whether it is tragedy or whether it is anything that you can glorify about the African experience in New York City and in America, whether it is good food, whether it is fantastic. So, well, thank you for convening this panel. It is very apt, actually, in the middle of this United Nations annual package, which actually epitomizes in a way what is going on the continent. Because all of these, like 5 recent coups in the Coup corridor, or what they call the Coup belt in Africa, there are only 2 presidents who have been able to make it this year. You're talking about India from PA. I think that's probably one of what we call the good coups. And then you also have Mohammed Bazoum, which is not so good coup. And we got 4 that can be able to make. So we could see how we could navigate on all those lines for a substantial conversation and how we can do education.
Do you mind speaking into the microphone because people are having a bit difficulty hearing?
Me?
Yeah, everyone. Yeah.
So I'm gonna pass on the mic to Milton Alamadi, publisher of Blackstone News.
Welcome, sisters and brothers, comrades, friends. It's appropriate that we're in a university setting. I think our task is to enlighten the world. Why is it that the African continent that has the most abundant resources in the world, compared to all other continents, also has some of the most impoverished people in the world? And in my presentation, I'll try to tie that with the transitions that we're seeing, because not all coups are the same after all, and we're going to make a distinction. At the end of the day, when we see Africans celebrating takeovers on the streets, they're not celebrating militarism. They are celebrating because they get a sense that there is hope of ending the frustration, because they're aware that they have so much and yet they have so little at the same time. And that is blamed on the bad leadership that we've had historically in most African countries. So welcome, and I hope you will get some insights on today's conversation. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. My name is Nyaka Lagoke. I am from the Ivory Coast, and then I teach at Lincoln University. I do history and Pan-African studies, and then I contribute to the preservation of the legacy of our ancestors. And 2 days ago, it was the birthday of Kwame Nkrumah, who is one of my greatest. And then the Mandelas, the Sankaras, the Patrick Lumumba, and then all the people that I've met. Somebody like Milton Alimadi, a very good friend of mine. And then we've been partnering, doing things with many others, Maurice Carney, Sean Blackman, regular people. And then we're making things happen. And believe it or not, we win in victory, and they are Pan-African victories. The conversation about the coup is a very important. I have given several interviews on the issue. And then we want to tell people that those coups that we see is not because we support military coups in Africa, but they are the outcomes of some situations that are not, that cannot be seen as democratic spaces of democratic value. And then if people want to prevent those coups, they have to elevate the standards of governance in Africa. And then not all coups are bad, even if the majority of them can be seen as bad. There are coups that can be revolutionary, particularly when they're led by people like Thomas Sankara or Robin, despite the flaws in the mistake. So that will be my perspective today, and I will be that way.
Thank you. So we have some people joining us that were not part of the panelists when we planned this event, but I would just want them to introduce themselves quickly.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Engineer Yusuf Ahmed. I came directly from Nigeria to join in person, just to encourage you in what you have been doing regarding the issues of coups in Africa. This is so unfortunate. That's my take. There are a lot of issues that made coups to be recurring in Africa. Mainly, I know the discussion is going to center around what are the major causes of the coups and what are the ways to maybe to tackle those issues. The take is bad governance. This is what I would just say for the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Mohammed Bazoum, the director of the New Hope Academy in the US here. And I just had a program and so interesting that we have a large community of Africans in Bronx. And I'm impressed with your effort to make this program of reality, and I will be able to contribute a little part that the coups in Africa is not only that the African are celebrating it because they get some freedom from the shackles of leadership, but I believe that also an experience for them to start thinking about the challenges of our administration and the so which I think we have to think about how to improve the quality of education in Africa to support them to understand the challenges that they're facing and everything. Thank you for making this panel.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Uranium, Mohammed. I'm very delighted to be here, especially in the midst of great intellectuals, dedicated people. You know, as the saying goes, the more the student learn, the less gap between him and his teacher. And I, for one, I must let you know that I'm here to learn. Being a passionate person about any ideas of Africa, which made me believe that I'm a poor and Africanist. So me coming across these events, I was so excited to make sure that I attend and benefit from what we're going to do. Because, and not only that, being a Bronxite for more than two decades, I found it interesting that this event is organized here, and we let the world know from the point of view of even diasporas who have been affiliated with another society and how they perceive the ongoing inconsistency of governance that led to the instability of the economy, security, challenges that is facing in Africa today. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Umar Shakhtar here. I'm a PhD student at Columbia University. I'm working on taking political history. Part of my interest in my research is to look at the legacy of 17th and 18th century scholarship in northern Nigeria and across the globe to the Middle East. What we get to Middle East. I'm interested in this panel because since we are looking at the present, so I'm working on the past, so I think it's a very interesting way to think about what happened now and what we were before we came here. And also, I would like to look at this issue as new colonialism, or post-COVID colonialism. And if we look at it in the lens of what happened in the the famous Berlin conference. At that time, we have major European countries. They came together to make a decisions on Africa, but unfortunately, there's no African representative in that conference. But now we have Africans that can say no, we say yes to whom we want to, and we say no to whom we want to, and we reject the bad governance from external colonialism and their hands in our leadership. So I would like to learn from this panel and to see how I can relate the security colonization conversation around academic environment and building.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to also say that we decided to host this event here at Boston College because this has never happened in the Bronx. This borough has the largest population of African immigrants in New York City, but everything happens downtown in the United Nations. And even all the African embassies don't engage the African community, so it's really symbolic that we're having this event here. So I would like to kick off by reading this in a recent article, Niger's coup deterred amidst Africa's complexities, leadership, geopolitics, and pathways forward. Veteran journalist Mamadou Niang said, "It is unusual for a coup deterrent in Africa to grab global headlines and galvanize Western political center." Mr. Niang underscored that there are several reasons to explain why this moment is different. Niger is an important geo-strategic mass of 49,000 square miles. That's almost twice as large as the state of Texas. It is rich in uranium, abundantly coveted by Europeans for their nuclear power plants, and it's a convenient base for anti-terrorist activities for the United States and France. Mr. Yang, please elaborate.
Yeah, in the last 2 years, there have been a stream of violent coups. This report, this last month, tomorrow, in Gabon. If you look at all of these cases, each one is different.
Yeah.
Each one is different. Each one has its own domestic characteristics. Maybe where they converge is the international impact that they have. But Niger, to see that the United States has a stake in France and the European Union has a stake in it, is because, first of all, Niger is a very large country. It is twice the size of Texas. Rich in uranium. This is the uranium that fire in power plants in the it's also that strip of the Sahel is the convergence of the active jihadists of the Al-Qaeda in the market. So it is especially important for France and for the United States because this is the moving ground for the Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram in Nigeria. So that's one part of it. The other part is that if Niger happens, and then what's next? Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. We've seen Gabon already. So that is what we look at now as Africans and ask the question, why is it happening now? Why is it stream of the corridor of Sahel, which is, of course, maybe the most neo-colonial or post-colonial of West Africa, of all of Africa. And that is why it is important to look at this actually in this association with the former colonial. And I like to always look at this moment in Africa with the connection of where the genesis is of our diseases, of our illness in terms of governance. In November 1884 to February 1885, in Berlin, we had lived this experience of the division, of the marshalling, of the dividing of Africa by the Western powers. And that has created, 54 different countries that used to be one magnet. If you take my country of Senegal, in the middle of it, you find another small country called Gambia, whereas I speak the same language of so many of the Gambians, or blind, so many of the Gambians, where we express ourselves internationally in English and in French. It is not easy to mold, to bring those two countries together because of what? Thousands of years have passed away. So I'm looking at this in terms of colonization and in terms of balkanization, how we could find a way not only to restructure Africa to make it one continent, to make it one geopolitical space, to see how we could actually begin to realize the dream of development, the of political unification. And I would like to begin there and see, how we could have a conversation in terms of looking at Africa in terms of like one entity.
Thank you, Mamadou. United States of Africa. Milton, do you think this is possible? And are all coups bad?
Thank you. There's a very good video, actually it's a lecture, but it's on YouTube by Walter Rodney, and it's called Crisis in the Periphery, Africa and the Caribbean. And it was recorded, I believe, in the late 1970s. And Rodney says, after the period of formal colonialism, we had the new African elite that took over the leadership. And he said, while formal independence was critical and important, it was not sufficient to transform the African continent, to transform our economies, and to be able to control our destiny. And therein lies the problem. The elite that took over after formal colonialism invariably, in almost every case, served the interest of the former colonial power, which was to continue getting cheap labor from Africa, cheap raw resources from Africa, not to industrialize, and to continue being dependent on imported manufactured goods from the former colonial powers. So in essence, colonialism did not end in Africa. It has never ended. It took on a different form. So now, instead of having European governors, you have African so-called presidents and prime ministers. In essence, you have Europeans in African skin. And therein lies the problem. How can you say you fought for independence when nothing has changed? And there's another very good book by a Czech anthropoid called Black Africa. And he also took the same position. He started writing about the issue of coups before there were coups in Africa. In one of his earliest essays, which was, I believe, in 1956, and then later on he wrote another one in 1963. He said, if we do not form a United States of Africa, we are going to South Americanize Africa. And what did he mean? By that time, we were already having monthly coups in South America. Most of it instigated, of course, by the United States, which did not want the emergence of a unified, independent South America, which was in control of its economy. And Job said, this is what is going to happen in Africa. And the only way to prevent it is by forming a United States of Africa. He said, we cannot talk about economic groups like ECOWAS, for example, groups like the East African Community. He said, you're putting the cart before the horse. You need to have political union first because you have to sacrifice sovereignty. We cannot have so many competing sovereignties. You won't be able to make any decision about how to transform your economies. So at some point, we did start to have those coups in African countries. Now, since then, we have had some qualitatively different coups. The one that my brother, Professor Naka, noted in Burkina Faso, for example, with Thomas Sankara, in Ghana with Jerry Rawlings, those were essentially revolutionary coups that sought to end the bad old ways of African dependency on the former colonial powers, and those were unique. Now, the recent coups we've been having, and I will confess, I was very skeptical from the get-go in conversation with my brother, Naka. I said, these coups, to me, do not come close to what Thomas Sankara was trying to do. And my brother said, we have to give them some space. And in retrospect, it turns out that he's correct. I've now amended my position. I look at the coup in Mali, initially in 2020, I thought Assimi Goïta was trying to hijack what might have been a domestic, authentic revolution. Even if that had been the case, it's since completely changed. He's now a part of the masses, speaking the language of decolonization, getting rid of French influence and French exploitation. And now the coups that came later are reflecting the language of the ones in Mali, particularly the one in Burkina Faso. There was one in January 2022, but that one had some problems. So there was a second one in September 2022, and that brought Ibrahim Traoré. And now he's speaking language similar to what we are hearing from Assimi Goïta in Mali. Niger, it may have started as a personal beef between President Bazoum and the leader of the presidential guard, General Chiani. And General Chiani is a bit older, he's 62. So he doesn't belong in the generation of the Assimis and Traorés. But even in his case, even if he's conservative or reactionary, it's beyond him now. The people have come out on the streets and they've built a movement, which is now similar to what's going on in Burkina Faso and in Mali. The one in Gabon, I have some doubts.
Even that.
But even in his case, whether he's conservative, whether he's out to protect the interests of the Bongo family, I think the movement will supersede him. And if he stands in the way, I believe he too, General Mwema, will also be pushed out. So that is my analysis for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Milton. This is where we bring, experts from our community to really speak truth to power. So thank you so much for that. So Professor Naka, I'm going to go to you next. United States of Africa. Is that feasible? And if so, what role do you think the African Union ECOWAS has to play in this? If any?
Okay, you gave me the most difficult question. Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat what Niang and Milton said. I agree. And what he said is so beautiful. I don't know if I've got any better job. But yet, so, but the other thing I want to say, I want to emphasize, I know Niang used the word post-colonialism, but I know it's not what he meant, although we're still in the age of neo-colonialism. And then, so that is the situation in which we are. I'm going to give a different approach to the debate about the African Union. Now, usually, when we talk, I'm talking about the activists. I'm talking about the intellectuals. They have like a negative view about the African Union. And then one day, I forgot the name, but Rita, a lady from Nigeria, a great scholar, and she did a lot of work around and with the African Union. And one day I was there, and she was talking, and she said, we have to see, we have to be able to acknowledge the positive things that they do. And then if there are things that we do not agree with, we can denounce, or we can tell them that, these are the things that they need to fix. Today, we are talking about Pan-Africanism. We want Africa to be united, and we want, like Milton said, we want people to be free. And the military that we see who are taking over, all the African people are using all the tools at their disposal, and by any means necessary, they want Africa to be free. But before we get there, we have to see that when the the Organization of the African Unity was created, even if that institution adopted the gradual process for the unification of Africa, contrary to the position of Nkrumah, Gamara Denase, Modibo Keita, and then Sékou Touré, well, we have to acknowledge that that organization was going to be at the forefront of the struggle for decolonization in Africa. That's one thing that all of us, we cannot deny, that they did different countries, Tanzania, Algeria, they did that under the umbrella of the Organization of the African Unity. The struggle against the apartheid was also conducted, supervised by that organization. And then there are several other things they did, even if we did not see what we want to see. At the level of the narrative, the Lagos Plan of Action 1980, the Treaty of Abuja 1991, NEPAD, even though that particular framework was embedded in the neoliberal worldview, and now the treaty that we I don't know how to say that in French or in English, the treaty that they put together like 2018 to promote a common market in Africa. So even if all those things that I just mentioned, at least at the level of the narrative, it contributes to advance the cause of Pan-Africanism. When Mrs. Zuma, Dlamini Zuma, became the head of the African Union, we saw that Pan-Africanism that was put aside for decades was not going to be a part of the common and the recurrent conversation of the African Union. Now you can see the Agenda 2063, people were writing the word Pan-Africanism, they were claiming Pan-Africanism. Sometimes when you see people in the streets, they want to say, oh yeah, the African leaders, all of them, they sell out, they did not do anything. No, I'm giving you this picture so that people can see. They too, with the limitation, flaws and everything, they somehow contributed to advance the cause of Pan-Africanism. And the turning point was when the South African lady, Mrs. Zuma, was leading the African Union Commission. And now we have arrived at a moment when in West Africa, because of the revival of Pan-Africanism, people are claiming the issue of sovereignty. We can see that Pan-Africanism has become the essential or the most shared aspiration of the African people. Now, the question is, how do we become united? And that is another conversation. And the alliance that was put together by Mali, Burkina Faso, and then Niger recently, that military alliance, is also a step. It reminds of what Ghana, Guinea, and Mali did in the past. It reminds us of the union between Ghana and Congo, and then when people genuinely wanted to come together in the name of the African unity in order to fight against neocolonialism. And one element that is very important, and I'm going to end there, is that when we become united, how do we do it? And then I belong to a group of people who think that yesterday Nkrumah was talking about scientific socialism, and many people spoke about capitalism or neoliberalism. I think that we need to promote an ideology around which we can come together, and that will be the Ubuntu philosophy. The Muslims call that, the people in Mali, they call that Maya, which is about humanism. But that philosophy, which is like the Bantu philosophy, it is spread across the continent of Africa. And then for me, we can find that as an endogenous value system, which is inherent to the African reality, around which we can build, at least on the theoretical level, before putting that into practice, how we can design a new political system. Because today, when the Europeans say, no, those military coups are against democracy, we say, no, yes, it may be a regression, but we want to find a new system that is embedded in the African reality that can also claim some positive aspects of the European model. And then the second element is going to be that we move to economy, and then, of course, a cultural revolution. And I'm going to end and say that even Ghana, under the leadership of Nana Akufo-Addo, who seems to be siding of the neo-colonial agenda, his speech at the UN was very, very surprising. He spoke about reparations, and Ghana is going to organize in mid-November a big conference with CARICOM in Ghana about reparation. So Africans are trying, and then the last one will be about the Togolese initiative to organize the 9th Pan-African Congress, and then we are part of the process, so things are moving, and then maybe, who knows, in the next 5 to 6 years, we can see 3 or 4 African countries coming together. It can be Gambia and Senegal together, or Mali and Niger, Burkina, who knows? So that is what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for eloquent. So while we're here at the state that we are at right now, I was at the downtown event, the sideline event, but actually by Devin. Devin is the giant media company. And you don't hear these perspectives, right? Number one, we're not represented. I mean, this is not complaining. This is just stating the fact that we're not represented in that conversation. There's no one like us sitting there. They're talking at us, but we're not part of the conversation. And it's also a fact that United Nations infrastructure and also all the African embassies constantly around the world that are representing supposedly Africa, the technocrats and so on. Some people share the view that they're not really representative of the grassroots African community. So we talk African society. When we talk about uniting Africa, those government, those representatives of the government across Africa right now, they're not really necessarily elected by the people. Yeah, democracy, there is democracy, government of the people, for the people, by the people. That's not what's happening from what's unfolding, around the world, not just only in Africa. So my question is, as we're talking about United Africa, the people that some people termed goalkeepers of the colonialists, right? Which are some of the African leaders right now. How would this idea, this proposition of United Africa, how is that possible when you have a structure in place that's been in place since colonial, since independence or whatever time, whether pre-colonialism or post-colonialism? I'm saying, how is it possible to get to what we envision, what you're proposing here, that we propose in United Africa? I'm going to go to Mohammed Niang.
Yeah, the nagging question of leadership quality of our leaders generally, that are not only falling short of delivering progress to the that creates all of these crises you see, whether it is in Senegal or in Mali, especially this Francophone, French-speaking West Africa, can be also understood within the neo-colonial framework in this particular area that is called France-Afrique. France-Afrique, which was a concept that was created with the advent of General de Gaulle was the first French president of what we call the Peace Treaty after World War II. That in 1960, with the advent of African resistance and French willingness of a different type of relationship with Africans, decided to give them independence in a way. But the conditional independence, meaning that they would have to help or they would have to decide to pick who those leaders would be in those 14 African countries that share this colonial language of French. So that's Senegal, I mean, you know, all of those. And those leaders who have done those countries, of course, mirror the reality of the French perspective about Africa. So if we're having a Macky Sall as a president in Senegal today, he's gonna have to work with Paris to decide about the most significant, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is agriculture, whether it is industrialization. So the colonial arrangement that French had fashioned with these countries in West Africa generally and Central Africa is the same bond that you see represented in the United Nations at the European Union Assembly. So these are leaders that cannot operate, that cannot evolve without actually the French mandate in terms of how the countries must be represented. And you are seeing that the failure of administration, the failure of creating, well, the failure of education, of health, this is actually propelling all of these youth outside the country. What we're seeing, I mean, recently in New York, this influence of Senegalese, this is very, I mean, this is something that is absolutely unusual, because the Europeans have closed the doors of immigration. Now it is, they're coming to the US by way of Nicaragua. I mean, you know, it is so devastating. But anyway, it is very hard to understand the political situation in West Africa outside of its neo-colonial kind of sphere.
So on the issue of the structures and the danger or the impediment that these structures present to a union of African nations. I think those are the challenges that we're dealing with. As I like saying now, I like going back to Rodney, because he said in these type of challenges, you have to ask the correct questions. So what are some of these key structures that are preventing us from actualizing a union of African nations? Brother Mamadou correctly talked about the leadership, and that's part of the problem. A lot of the leaders emerge from the kind of political parties that we have in many of these African countries. And Rodney said these parties represent the elite. They represent the comprador interest. So what we need to do is, first of all, have parties that represent the interest of workers, of students, of farmers, and we don't have that in African countries. So often, and we who are also offering advice and suggestions, we are also part of the elite. But he was willing to say, yes, I recognize that, I am part of the elite, but by recognizing that I'm part of the elite, I can now be willing to work with the people who should actually be running these countries, the working people. and we don't have that. We can advise them, but let there be parties of the workers, by the workers, and for the workers. So that would be one aspect. And then the second thing is the disproportionate and destructive control that the World Bank and the IMF has over African countries. And here, our sisters and brothers in diaspora can help us. Many of my sisters and brothers contact me, and I join them in condemning AFRICOM and US bases in Africa. But I ask them, and I say, why don't you also join me in condemning the actually very murderous control that the World Bank and IMF has over African countries? Some of the conditions for the loans, the former minister in Malawi told the world that the World Bank said Malawi should first destroy its food reserves in order to qualify for a World Bank loan. They destroyed the food, there was famine, then they got the loan. So the World Bank is actually playing a big role in the destruction of Africa. So we need to get rid of that as well. And then in terms of, this is where we also should recognize the power of the youth in Africa. I think the power of the youth have actually redirected some of these recent coups in the progressive direction. It was because of the power of the youth. This is the power we need to harness as we bring the new leadership in Africa. They must be a part of the leadership as well.
I want to. Yeah, Dr. Nasir, I know you've been listening. I'd like you to come in. And I also want to go to the youngest people in this group here that you have to be quick. If you want to say something, you have to. Dr. Nasir.
Very interesting conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm impressed to be around intellectuals, and I'm very much delighted to find myself with well articulated personalities who are making a very good point with regards to our challenge in Africa today. What I'm saying is that the wave of change in Africa is just the beginning because of the technology devices and also the education in Africa. Most of our African elite today, some of them come to the Western world and they get the basic knowledge, they know how things happen here. And now technology is also putting a lot of improvement to the nature of the life of people in Africa, because information goes very fast today. And the large number of African communities today is the youth. And I believe the youth have a lot of impact to make a difference in their lives, because to me, I don't see it as a game of blame at this time, because the African leaders who are living there are educated and they know the trend of life, they know how society, progressive society survive with their own economic system. So whatever situation we find ourselves in Africa today, we blame our leaders. That is number one, because leadership is one of the things that makes a society to grow and grow in the right direction. And the vision of leadership, especially let's take what is happening in Dubai today, is a leadership manifest. Because when the ruler of Dubai choose to change from oil to economy, and we made a very big, huge difference in just less than 20 years. And I believe that is possible in Africa today because we are blessed. A lot of things are available in Africa that will make Africa great. And I feel that the people who are trying to blame the other Western world, everybody is just carving for what you can get. And I believe that African leaders who are coming to United Nations, who are coming to Congress, presenting their problems, I believe that all is part of searching for solution of our challenges, which I believe that presently we're in a modern world where education becomes very, very easy. It's not like before. So I believe that to end my point is that what the professors are saying here is well articulate presentation that makes a lot of sense. And I believe that if someone will be out there to listen to what is happening here, it's nothing but a fact
of what is happening today in our lives. And I believe that the change is here and people are ready to enjoy the change because that's what meant to happen in terms of knowledge. When there's education, there will be change.
Thank you. I know, Ibrahim has to leave, but I want you to, state, maybe should come in and so on. And you also, I want to underscore that you have gone to Nigeria, and I think you have run for office in the local community in Nigeria 3 times now, spending your own money and your time. So you know exactly, what's happening within the grassroots forest communities in the north, right? So why don't you speak to that? The report, there was a recent report by Open Society, the computers over there, I can really put it as I would love to, stating that from their research, they found the majority of the people in the global community, they really do want democracy. They don't want communism, they don't want dictatorship, they want democracy, especially young people. But the system is not in place to really support their desire, and they're not really get vote. It's not really counting to again, the kind of government that they would like. So from your perspective, I haven't been there and experienced rather than your perspective, what do you have, you're a good person, maybe you're in a better position, I should say, to really answer this conversation.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Coincidentally, one of my opposition that we contested with my local house here in the name of Engineer Medahawa. He contested one of the famous parties or biggest party in Nigeria, and I contested also from one of the small parties. Like in PDP, I contested from yes, as we all heard very intellectual, well detail of challenges we are facing right now in Africa and next to the coup. As my observation is concerned, I'm considered being surrounded by youth, and what was the motivation factor that led myself after being observed and participating in how democratic is practiced, or democracy is practiced here under the political factor or how it is exercised. I come to see like a democracy or politics like an institution where both citizens join together in order to create a policy in which their community, society, the nation could be led, direct or indirect. Both groups are politicians. It depends on what superlative really one type of life to participate in order to bring a good policy to make the politics stable. But unfortunately, as far as the topic we are discussing, Africa that led to the coup, you will see the political evaluation, or rather political, sociological immorality in a way where the definition in which it was defined may not necessarily, or a traded definition that doesn't work with our system, our society, because the young shall grow are not seeing the benefit of what has been named to be or explained to be democracy. Therefore, they have been abandoned, they have been left by themselves, they are being deprived in giving the fruit of whatever democracy grow as a tree. As a result, they found themselves in a state of confusion. They are not getting information or being involved or giving the actual amenities that we were believed to have been one of the fruits that this democracy brings. So as a result, things are going wrong. Now, part of it is the fact that the most important thing to be enjoyed under democracy is nothing but an organized and coordinated system of governance, where individual situation, individual circumstances are being addressed in accordance due to the branch or system. So the system, is the system working, or the system is stagnant, or the system is stable? As compared to what the professor said, like there's the way or how or what brought about the past military deviation that led to coup is different from the perception of the military coup of today. What I mean by that? The vibe that is psychologically trending in the mind of the youth is exactly what was mentioned, neocolonialism. But who knows, who understands, or who even care to know what is neocolonialism? But indirectly, as the professor said earlier, the skin of somebody from somewhere controlling somebody within your premises, within your system, within your society, within your people, fighting against your people is one of the biggest challenges. How do we scrap that out of our mind? Is where and what led to the new perception of the coup that is happening in Africa. The new coup d'etat, if you notice, you will see that immediately it takes place. God forbid. Immediately it takes place, you will see the masses behind them supporting what they do. Because the vibes was different from the past. Like it's no longer about, because you lack patriotism and you are jumping to Pan-Africanism. You're skipping so many steps for you to even understand who you are within your territory, who you are within your nation, who you are within your local. So all these things are being completely disconnected and you're expecting the electricity to reach where? When the generator, when the actual genesis of what to provide a solid and stable electricity is not even provided. What are you talking about? We don't even have the chairman system of local government. We don't have the pure, total system, and even in the state governance. So talk less about the federal. So the disconnection is leading to those who believe that we have been trained to defend this country. And we are seeing this happening. It's like there's a saying in Nigerian terms, they say the national case. As a politician, as a person who was in law enforcement, I've been in 2 wars of observing such behavior and how it's affecting us, that the lack of morality to understand the direction of what politics we're claiming is, or what democracy we're claiming is definitely need to be redefined and reconstructed that fits our society and community. For our military to believe that they are there to defend it, even without being interfering, and let that democracy, the will of the people, and then have an economy and society.
Thank you, Brian. So you ran for office as well, and I'm not sure if you believe, have you lived in the diaspora before, or have you always lived in Nigeria? Yes, I want to know what led you to run, and always very, very good. So tell us why you ran for office, and what is the youth want? What do you think the problem is with democracy in Africa?
Okay, this is the second time I ran for political office. I ran when I was 20-something years. Immediately when they passed the Not Too Young to Run bill, for young people, there was a barrier. As a young person, we were the majority of the population, the African population and also the Nigerian population. But that barrier of young persons participating in government, youth inclusion in politics, was a barrier. Then the presidency or what have you, they passed a bill that young persons from 25 years can participate and compare and aspire to run for political office. I contested for the member House of Representatives and I lost at the primaries. What led to loss at the primaries was purely corruption. Young persons for somebody at 20-something years without enough resources, without enough, connections. Because in politics, you need resources and also connections. Definitely the big wigs made their ways. You were defeated tactically without you even being part of the secondary election. With that experience, 4 years later, then we say, let us recontest again under the major opposition party. PDP, my political party, led Nigeria for almost 16 years. 16 good years. But now we are the opposition. We contested again. We followed the corrupted process. You know, whether you like it or not, you must compromise in one way or another. As a young person, this is how we nurture the young person. No matter, that's why we put no brighter future for Africa, in as much as young persons are nurtured in such odd ways. You need to have a lot of money for you to even aspire to win the primaries. There is what we call a delegate process. The delegates, you have to give them like not less than $1,000. Maybe you have like 600 delegates. You need $600,000 for you to win primaries. In secondary elections, you need like over $1 million to win an election, especially in the most populous states in Nigeria. This is so huge. Young people rallied around us, but the political winds did not allow us. There was a tsunami, there was a change. Young people were aiming for change, and they rallied behind us. What happened, happened. Even the Nigerian judiciary is very so unfortunate to say. But what I want to say, the reason why I even gave this background is that there are a lot of young people with potentials in Africa. We have to invest in those young people because there is what we call that we have to nurture these young people so as to have a brighter future. But the problem is that there is no succession plan. In Africa, no succession plan. You will see a president serving for over 3 decades. Why? Because of greediness. This is what leads to all the coups d'etat that happened in Africa. You will see a president serving 30 years. After he will abdicate and his son will inherit. There is no democracy. If you want democracy, democracy says the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So this is the problem, and we must find a way to solve this problem for us to be out of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I know you want to say something. Please hold on quickly. I want to go to the young PhD candidate from American University. What is your experience so far?
Thank you so much. So I think the problem, as of course, like-minded, we are spoken about these current issues. So if the problem is like the way you see it, like from every angle, so I think my perspective is to go back to the drawing board again. To go back to our identity first. If we can do this, at least we can start to create diversity. I don't think the framework of another person can solve our problem. Since we are different, we need to acknowledge that. That's why my research is about going back to trace African legacy. So I'm thinking about that through if we can tap into those legacies, therefore we can reflect that to our current situation, because we know the colonization and the decolonialism and whatever we call it, our personal problem for our major issue that we have as people. We have our own collective-minded that we need to also acknowledge that. But using the new technology, since technology is a platform that can give you a chance to present yourself the way you want. I think if you know how to manipulate technology and you can be creative, you can do something that is so innovative in a way that no one can contain that is because it is part of your creativity. So I think we need to tap into technology and history, nurture our people who we are and who we were before. We don't have to tap into what we were taught about ourselves. We need to talk to ourselves through the way that we can speak to ourselves by ourselves. I mean by that, what I mean by that is to listen to our ancestors. We have to, yes, value the knowledge that we are acquiring everywhere we work, but we also have to value our traditions. We have to go back to ourselves, listen to ourselves back home. We need to value our ancestors and our legacies. And I'm happy that next to me is the professor of legacies. So we can learn more from them and also the Pan-Africanism. So even the shape of Pan-Africanism, the way we see it, in a way is a framework of non-African intellectuals. As we know, there was a time in history that this Pan-Africanism has been hijacked. But of course, by our people, but as I said here, the new colonialism was black-stream. So I think that these are the things that when I listen to this kind of intellectual discussions, this is where I always my mind is going. How can we back to trace our legacies? How can we back to decolonize the narrative of ourselves? How can we define ourselves the way we want to? How can we tap into the technology so that we can create it and find out solutions for ourselves?
All right, thank you, ladies, gentlemen.
We have a couple of.
We still have, I thought we would time to take a break, so.
I think we're not gonna take the break, we're just gonna run
It was gonna run. Okay.
Oh, Chief, quickly. Then.
Thank you. Listening, and I keep hearing certain things about youth, about administration, about government, and I'm thinking back to when I first became engaged around questioning issues around Pan-Africanism. It was early. I was a young man, and I was working with young people who were coming out of Southern Africa at that time, who were really rallying physically against administrative colonialism, and a new generation of colonial black-skinned leaders had not really set in as it has, I think, in a lot of the Western African countries. In that period, I first met Walter Rodney through Joshua Okomo's daughter, Amanda, and the work became familiar with the work that he was doing by other young people who were trying to emulate and trying to implement the principles, as you spoke of earlier. And then working with the PAC, we worked with Samuel Joma and the SWAPO, we worked with ANC, of course, and of course things that were happening in Angola. So my point is that those young people at that particular time had nothing to lose. And they had not been administratively brought into the idea of the neo colonial mindset. And I think one of the problems that we're having with the Coup corridor is that you've had now 4 or 5 generations of colonial mindedness, administration development. Whereas the period when I was working with these young people, they were coming right out of the bush. They were coming right out of the villages, and they were committed to an ideal and a principle that I think through the process of administrative colonialism has gotten really mixed up and confused. And, I'm just thinking, and I'm remembering, we used to sit and bring over brothers from the ANC, and they were on the run from the South African government, and folks were coming from Namibia, and then Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. But the emphasis that they put on the principles of change were very well rooted. And I think through administration, through the relationships with colonial masters today, a lot of that has become less soft, less too fluid. And that's my perspective.
That's a problem. Good observation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for allowing our people to speak. So when I said that you were willing to speak, of course, now I listened to the presentation. It was like a speech, campaigning. That case was in the flesh. Not only in the blood, I can even see like in your veins, in the blood, I can see that. Yeah, so yeah. So that's cool. And so thanks for the perspective. And this is what we're doing. We want to have that kind of conversation and often. And so anytime I have an opportunity to be among people to talk about Africa, this is my priority. So that's why I'm here. One thing I want to say, a couple of things. The first element, Milton said something, and that's why I want to speak right after him, because I didn't want to forget it. And then I did not forget it. So I'm going to talk about it. Again, my job, when I meet people, I want to share my experience. I was young too. And then I was fearless, and then I'm still fearless. But I was involved in the struggle. But today, what is happening? But we should not have the idea that anytime there is change in Africa, it is always the youth. Yes, the youth play a major part, but it is always an intergenerational struggle in Africa. That's one thing I want all of us to know. It is always a intergenerational struggle, always. That's the first element. Number two, not all African leaders are that bad. But that is what I want people to see. Not all of them, even the ones that we do criticize, they try to do the right thing. That's point number two. Point number three, you guys, and me included, we don't know the face of neocolonialism. We don't. We think we know, we don't. Even in the speeches, because the European, when the way they do these things, like they want to control the narrative. So even when you see an African leader saying something they don't like, it is a revolutionary act. We don't know that. So when they come to the UN and they speak, but we make they're just doing that for politics. But you don't know the struggle behind the delivery of the speeches. We don't know. See? And just to give you an example, we saw the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. The leaders you were talking about, the criminals, the thieves, everything you can imagine. But they were the ones who stood to the Europeans. They said, we're not going to support you. We will not support Zelensky. We want that they don't have the ideological background or backbone of Kwame Nkrumah, but maybe they never studied non-alignment. But then we are not going to support you. What I'm trying to do is that we need to try and see when they do right and when they do wrong. This is what everywhere I go, this is what I do. I do not have time to go in details. I was a journalist myself for 8 years. I spent my life denouncing Fogbani when he was in power, who was not on the side of the goal and everything you can imagine. One day, I think I said that in my Milton show. One day, I was young, I saw a word in a newspaper. They asked me, Fogbani, Ivory Coast is producing cocoa. Why you don't have a chocolate factory? So Fogbani said, if I wanted to do that, the European will not going to allow me to do it. So my friends, this is what I want us to see. The one that front, let's look at the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa. I like to talk, if I talk about the Togolese Minister of Foreign Affairs, who gave a speech yesterday, like the Francophone world, it went viral, saying that we are tired. That was the Anna for you. We are tired of the paternalism. We are tired of your arrogance. We are tired of everything. So in the Francophone world, it went viral. But I want to put emphasis on Dr. Naredi Pandor. Now, do you know her? Yes. No, not you. Do you know all of you know her? You know her? You see? And again, it's not your fault. But if you take your time to follow that woman, then you're going to respect her. You're going to have an admiration for her. She stood up to Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State of America, who went to South Africa in order to ask the South Africans to support the American position against Russia. It's okay if you want us to do that, no problem. But what about Palestine? You see, so we need to try and see that we come and say, you know what, all the African leaders apart. Even when I had the opportunity to meet with them in Togo, I told them, you're not going to come and tell me that in 60 years, that Africa could not produce a good leader. And then the same people are going to put out there a narrative about Mandela being a sellout. And people are going to come and repeat the same thing. Somebody is going to spend 27 years of his life in prison. His family was destroyed. Everything that he can imagine. He comes out, and then somebody like Udelesi who just died, peace be upon him, to speak like Muslim, who was going to try and bring South Africa on the verge of a civil war. But South Africa, somehow, under the leadership of Mandela, or his involvement, South Africa did not experience a civil war. He became president. But weakened at the age of 75. And then he can do whatever thing he did. No, you go to see South African. Oh, yeah, Mandela was a sellout. He came, he did not nationalize the mining sector. Where have you seen the mining sector in Africa being nationalized? Where have you seen that? For Mandela to be the first one to do that in 60 years of African independence. For me, my emphasis is that we need to understand the intricacies of African politics, the weaknesses of our leaders, but also the destructive interference of neocolonialism. It's not something that they do from time to time. They do that every minute, every hour, and every week is what they're doing because they want to maintain Africa in that state. My last point is going to be this. How do we make our leaders do the right thing? And Milton was talking about it. If people are not involved in the process, then of course. But because today they saw that there is like a revival of Pan-Africanism. Yet there was like 15 years ago when we started our Pan-African meetings in DC. People don't want to use the word Pan-Africanism, but today, listen, if you tell somebody that you're not Pan-Africanist, the guy is going to be upset. Everyone's want to do that. Everyone is claiming his part in the Pan-African legacy. Why? Because there were some people who were fighting, and today Pan-Africanism is the most south aspiration of the African people. Because of that, some leaders who thought that Pan-Africanism was not the right thing, they are adjusting. So if people are serious about the struggle for freedom and justice in Africa, we will make the leaders do what we want. Or from people from our midst will rise to power and they're going to continue the struggle. If we sit aside and then we are not involved in the realities of African politics, listen, they can come, they can corrupt them, they can take them and make them do what they want to the detriment of the interest of the people. So it is the burden is not on the leaders, the burden is on the masses. The burden is what? On us, and then we have to be the change that we seek, and we have to be the change that we want to see in Africa. That's my point. Thank you.
Okay.